is ScreenFlow UI design tips. So I'm going to give you an overview of all these different things, different tips, different practices I have collected over time, and I have kind of assumed as best practices for myself. Obviously, some of these will depend on preference, but I'm going to run through them quickly with you. As I was preparing this, I realized there is actually so much stuff that I need to tell you about. So hopefully I'm going to do a good job to capture all that. I have prepared a few slides, and then I'm going to show you a demo of a flow and some of these things in action, right? So before I get started, let me just introduce myself here. My name is Andy Engin Utkan. I'm a principal consultant of process automation. I work for Serious Solutions, a consulting partner. I'm an MVP and a content creator. My domain is salesforcebreak.com. So I link everything I do there. I do a lot of free content, YouTube, blog, a newsletter on LinkedIn. I do community presentations and, presentations and demos like this. I enjoy doing that. I teach flows. And I also have a Slack workspace that supports people who get stuck building their own flows. So I highly recommend you join that one. I just turned that over to the community team in terms of ownership. We renamed that Flownatic. It's a Flownatic Salesforce. It's a Flownatic Slack workspace. You can find the link, the invitation link on salesforcebreak.com. So go there and get it. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, several platforms. I'm quite active. I have a basic course that's hosted on my website, a Udemy course, and I do once in a while a 6-week-long bootcamp style course live to teach others flow. So if you're interested in any of that, check that out and join the website and the newsletter and the blog, YouTube channel, and so on. So let's go dive into our topic. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is ScreenFlow appearance and attributes, placement of components and label formatting, preview and debug, conditional visibility validations, display text, templates, and read-only components, menus and choice components, error handling and messages, fields, otherwise known as dynamic forms for flow, custom validations. I call them custom validations, kind of a workaround to show validation-related messages on the screen, and go to a record or URL functionality that a lot of clients and users ask for. We usually support that with unofficial SF or app exchange components, leveraging code. And some of the new, or let's say recent components like data table and choice lookup, and reactive components and Lightning Web components. So that's generally the format. And let's get started. Now, the focus of this presentation and discussion is the UI design elements, the UI design in ScreenFlows, right? So when discussing UI design in ScreenFlows, it's important to note that there are several ways you can deploy, distribute your ScreenFlows. And the way they look actually kind of depends on where it's run, right? Like it can slightly change depending on how you launch these flows. So what do I mean by that, right? So if you, for example, deploy your flow using the flow component on your Lightning record page, that's the upper left side here, right here, this one, it's going to show up on your page layout as a component. And the size is going to depend on, what kind of column layout you have, the shape. And, some of the design elements will depend on this deployment method. Now, if you deploy your flow in the utility bar, like if you have a console that you're working with, and the utility bar is like the bottom bar, where you can deploy several things. Amongst those several things, you can also deploy your flows there. It's an interesting way of deploying your flows because these flows are actually not aware of what record you are on. So, you know, they are kind of limited in functionality. They function completely delinked from what record you're looking at. And when you deploy it there, you can decide the size of the window that it's running in. And it's going to run in like a window that's kind of like a pop-up. You'll see like this is the middle one is the one that actually was launched using the utility bar. You'll see it. It's going to come with like with the name of the flow there, like the name of the utility bar component, let's say, and then you'll see several Windows elements here. That's how this shows up. And then on the bottom left side, you can launch your flow using a quick action button, right? Quick action button, you launch your flow. It's a modal like in the middle of your window. I wish it was a little bit bigger, but that's how it shows up. And you'll see across the top the name of the quick action, I think, and the screen that you designed for your flow. And you can launch your flow as well, like from within your flow, there is a run button, right? You can run it that way, or you can run it by calling it via the URL. When you call it via the URL, sometimes we also use hacks, tie them to buttons from list views and things like that. We can pass parameters to the flow, like, append things at the end of the URL. Then it kind of runs across the whole window. That's this one right here. I made the window smaller so that I can fit it here, but actually the whole thing goes across the whole window and it doesn't really look like a pop-up. And you can deploy your flows, screen flows, on community pages. I still call these communities, but they are digital experience pages, let's say, right? So if you deploy your flows on community pages, some of the design elements are taken from the design attributes that you decide on your community page. Like, for example, you'll see here the lines around the boxes, they are pitch black, right? And that actually comes from the community settings. And when you look at the other ones here, you'll see that the boxes are not entirely black. And the idea, I talked to the product team before, it's been a while, but the idea that they follow, I don't think it's perfect, but what they really want to do is they want the screen flow to assume the design elements and the design attributes and decisions from the environment that it is launched in, right? So that's the idea. But regardless of where you deploy your screen flow, I highly recommend that you keep it simple, easily readable, digestible, accessible, whatever you want to call it. Make sure that your contrasts are good, the font sizes are good, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, just keep on writing them on the channels that you are, and we'll get back to them. We're going to have a questions and answers session at the end. So having said that, how do we place our components and labels, and how do we format them, like in our screen flows? Now we drag our components onto this screen element, right? And most components have previews, some don't. So when you are adding your components, dragging those onto your screen element, some of those components will show up like this. It's going to show up exactly like it would appear when you run the flow, and some of the other ones don't have a preview, so you can't exactly see how it's going to look like. So for that, you're going to have to debug, run, do something. You can use sections up to 4 columns to help organize fields on the screen. So this is a 2-column layout. You can mix and match, so you can have one section with 2 columns, then no sections, like you can have your field go across the screen like this, and then have another section with 4 columns. You can use your columns to kind of create spacing. You don't have to drag and put something in your column. It could be empty, right? And some components don't align very well vertically when you put them into the setup, especially in your two-column setup. When you put two fields on the left side, two fields on the right side, you're going to see sometimes this one doesn't align with this one. You know, the product team has made some improvements related to this, but we still have some odd situations there. When that happens, what I usually do is I kind of take those out of the section layout, and then I make them go across the screen, whether I wanted it like that originally or not, but it doesn't really matter. I just do it that way so that it doesn't look weird, right? Because, you know, the eye and the brain kind of need those things to align, right? So if we don't see that, sometimes we get bothered as a user, as a consumer. And you can use, just little tip here if you didn't know, you can use HTML tags in most of the components that you add. Like, for example, if you add a text component, if you add a currency component, in the label, you can use HTML tags. This one was created by using bold. You can use the open an HTML tag for bold B, and then, you know, you can close it at the end. It's going to show up bold here. It doesn't work for pick lists, for example. It's not really standard across the board. You can paste emojis into your labels, and you can add variables into your labels as well. I mean, if you had a need, I mean, usually we don't really have a need for this, but if you had a need for the label to change, depending on the logic inside your flow, you could actually paste a variable name in there, and then the value of that variable is going to be the label. So that's where the preview and debug comes in. Like, you know, you want to preview and debug your flow really well. Like, first of all, you want to see how things look. Like I said that on the first slide, keep it simple. You don't want to make a very long form on a single screen of your screen flow. There is no reason for that. You can divide it into smaller portions, sections, especially if you have some kind of logic. Instead of forcing everything on the same screen and maybe using conditional visibility or something, you can split it up. I mean, and that also helps with some of the errors or some of the unexpected behavior that you could have in your flow. You wouldn't force your users to re-enter stuff if something for some reason doesn't work, if some things don't save, right? You know, in between two screens, you can choose to save the information to the database so that the user can continue if they come back to it, kind of make a fail-safe logic there. It'll help with that. You want to test your visual elements, you want to test your functionality, you want to design a whole journey. And as you try to give the user multiple choices and lead them through several decision paths, and then you think of all the possible situations, like, you know, if they want to look at, you know, the cases that are related to the contact, you know, there could be a situation where possibly there is no case related to the contact, right? So what do you do then, right? Do you go to the next screen at all? Do you go to a different screen? Do you display a message? Do you give them a chance to create a case? If you give them a chance to create a case, do you just assign the fields, or do you let the user enter all those fields? What happens if there is an error, like in false situations that you can foresee? What happens if there is a fault that you could not foresee? You know, like there is something that can happen that'll block the flow from, let's say, committing the changes to the database. What happens then? So it quickly gets complicated. I'm saying keep it simple, but the design and the build in nature is not that simple. It gets quite complicated. If you want to design for all the situations, all the possibilities in mind, and test it thoroughly, you're going to have to spend quite some time on this. No, one of the tools that we can use, a very important UI element, is the conditional visibility. So we can decide to show and hide some of the components on the screen based on the values that the other components take, right? So for example, like some very popular examples there, like if you insert a pick list, and a lot of times when we give the user the choice to choose a pick list value, we also want to give them the possibility of picking other, just in case, that user does not find any of the pick list choices like usable, like, they don't really apply to his case, his or her case, then they would want to pick other. And if they pick other, we really want to know what kind of choice that they would have wanted. So we give them a text input, usually like a text component, for them to enter what that other exactly means. But we want that only to show if the pick list value is set to other, then we see the text input. If the pick list value is set to anything else, we don't really want to see that text input. So conditional visibility comes quite handy in those situations. We can also show images and some kind of message like reaction, depending on what the user is selecting on the screen. Now, we are going to talk very briefly about reactivity, right? Up till the beta reactive formulas, reactive functionalities that the product team gave us, the conditional visibility was the only thing that was reactive on the screen. Everything else you'll see kind of change once you click next, right? You have to click next or nothing will change on your screen. Other than conditional visibility. Conditional visibility reacts immediately. So when you choose the pick list value, depending on the pick list value, that other input is going to disappear, right? So now let's talk about validations. Validations are quite important. We can use validations to enforce certain entries. The most popular example is going to be a length validation. Now, here, before I get into validations, I should note, other than the fields, dynamic forms for flow functionality, I'm going to get to that. The standard input components, text input component, currency input component, number input component, all those, and so on, they have no idea what the standard length for that field on that object is. Which means if we do not add validations into our screen flow components, at some point that flow is going to break. It's going to cause a fault. Why? If you enter, let's say, 500 character first name into a contact, it's going to throw an error because, once it goes to write that record to the database, it's not going to be able to complete the DML. It's going to throw a validation, system validation saying, this field doesn't accept 500 characters. So what do? We have to enter a length validation into our text input component and check for length and enforce, let's say, maximum 80, 40, 20, whatever the requirement is for that field. For that, you want to go and check. The interesting stuff is some of the standard fields do not show their length requirements in the object manager. Some of it you have to kind of go online, search, and then see what the standard for that field is. Some others you can't see there. For the custom ones, you define it anyway. You define whether it's a text 255, text 50, the same length has to be checked in your screen flow. And then another popular validation is for number and currencies. A lot of times we want to check whether the entry that the user is providing is meaningful or not. Like, for example, for an opportunity amount, we don't want the user to enter $5, right? It needs to be at least greater than or equal let's say $100. I don't know, whatever the requirement is. We can use greater, we can use less, we can use greater, equal, less equal. And we can also set up relative comparisons. This is an example here. It's a fairly complicated example I'll show you today in the demo. It is actually checking whether the combination of two fields is generating an acceptable result or not, right? Another popular one is format validation. For that, I have actually a blog post that's quite popular: email, SSN, social security number, zip and postal validations. I give examples. I'll dig out the link for you. It's one of the older ones, and I pasted it into chat for you. Now, the validations, when we're talking about the validations, I have to remind you, if you have not spent a lot of time on flow validations, flow validation logic is the exact reverse of the object manager field validation logic for some reason. I think back in the day, I think Salesforce acquired the ScreenFlow solution. This was a solution that was mainly built and designed to give call center agents a way to, see what they need to be telling the customer and, collect information and input from the customer. And I guess that solution had this logic reversed, and they never changed it. So in flow validation, you define in this logic what's acceptable as an entry, and then this message will be shown if this logic is false. It's the other way around in object manager, right? So don't get confused with that. Although I covered that in all of my trainings, I get that question afterwards. I'm like, this doesn't work. Well, it does work, but it doesn't work the same way as the object manager. So display text, templates, and read-only. Display text is a rich text component that can show static text, field and variable values, images. We can use colors, bold, italic, underline, and etc. We can use all that stuff there. We can add text templates. I mean, we can create text templates that are either simple text or rich text, and we can include them in here. We can, for example, create a line break text template and then, add that into our strings when we are accumulating our strings. And the contents of the display text component are not editable, right? So they are there for you to consume as the user, to read. And, like recently with the reactive formulas, the question came up, we want to have our fields react to other fields and components, but we don't want the user to be able to edit. What can we use? We don't really have a text component that's read-only or disabled. We have the display text component, but display text component, unfortunately, is not reactive yet. We can't use it in reactivity situations. So an alternative hack recommendation is there is the email component and the phone component. These are slightly different components. Back in the day, I think they used to call them lightning components. You'll see also on the right side, they come with a slew of parameters. And one of those is read-only or enable disabled. You don't really have to use them to show email or phone values. You can actually use them to show any string. So you can use those, repurpose those to create components on your screen that are not editable. So menus and choices are quite important. Like when you create comprehensive journeys for your users, you're eventually going to give them choices, menus. And, the simplest way you can do that is a radio choice component. If you give them a radio choice, you are going to list them, the choices one after another, one below the other, and then the user can choose them. And there are alternative visual elements that we can use. I often use the quick choice component that's from unofficial SF. there are similar installable packages on unofficial SF or App Exchange. And this is a quick choice component, for example. I can decide what icon to use here. These come from the Lightning Design System standard icons. I can use and reuse the standard object logos, for example, icons. And these come with several options, that change your experience. For example, this one comes with an option, with a setting that allows the user to proceed immediately once they click on one of the choices. They don't really have to click on a next button. Once they click on one of these choices, they are going to proceed to the next page. And we can also relabel buttons when necessary to create tailored experiences. The buttons down below that say next, finish, whatever, they can be renamed, relabeled. Now, error handling in messages. We need to use fault paths, but aim to eliminate them by replacing them with logic elements and additional paths. What I mean by that is this. When you use a fault path in your flow, you do not eliminate an error email. The error email, the fault email, is going to be still sent out, which means if you are a consultant like me, creating many flows, and you're most probably receiving those emails still, you're going to be bombarded with those emails to remind you your fault path catches the previously unexpected error, but it doesn't really eliminate or solve the error, kind of. Like you can take a different path based on the fault path, but I mean, your problem is not like in the middle of the dinner table, but your problem is still there. Like my personal preference is, if I know that, I'm taking the fault path quite often, I need to go back in and see what's causing that and give choices to the user to take a different path, not to cause that possibly, right? So my aim is to not go down the fault path. That's my ultimate aim. Obviously, you don't want to be versioning your flow like every day, but still, when you touch it again, you should build logic for all those previously unforeseen conditions. Now, use targeted error screens that not only have fault message for the user, but also have related information for the user, such as current date and time, record ID, and record name. Tell them to take a screenshot of this and send it to the admin. This will be extremely useful for you. Like, for example, it says here there was a problem, and this is the fault message. That you can add the fault message onto your screen. We have a global variable that allows us to do that. And then tell the user that the changes have been rolled back, nothing has been committed, if that's the case, and then tell them to try again, or before trying again, even take a screenshot of this and send it to the admin. You can provide the record name, record ID for your own use as an admin, date and time. That way you'll know exactly once you receive that message what went wrong, with what record. How many times have we received emails from the user saying, well, this doesn't work? Well, I mean, that's very hard to troubleshoot, right? You need more information to be able to troubleshoot the problem that you have. And use a catch-all error screen to capture all unforeseeable errors. Now, this is actually my catch-all error screen down below. For everything else that I can kind of foresee, I have more targeted messages. I don't really have to insert the fault message there, because the fault is the fact that something doesn't work as intended in the way the journey is designed, but it's not really an unforeseeable error. So in that case, I will write the message to the user. I will say, okay, this is what you wanted to do, but that's not going to happen right now. So these are your choices. Error screens should include clear instructions. Remember to include a message outlining what has been committed, what has been rolled back. So we've been through that, yes. So next, let's come to fields, dynamic forms for flow. Now, if you're not using this, you are missing out big time. It is not 100% complete yet, but it is making the ScreenFlow creation, ScreenFlow builds much faster and easier for admins, for low-code builders. So, and the good thing about this is, like, you can mix and match stuff. Look, for example, this doesn't support the opportunity amount yet, like the currency field is not supported, which drives me crazy. But in the end, I can add everything that is supported using this functionality. You need to create a record variable. That record variable will be shown here. And then you're going to get a list of all these fields that are supported, standard or custom. And you can drag those onto the fields, onto your screen. And these come with the standard validation. Now, we talked about length. Like these are going to all come with like length validations. You don't really have to custom build that. It's a pain to build lookups, for example, in ScreenFlows. If you add a lookup from the fields functionality, it's set up very easily. Now, a couple of things that these don't support. We talked about currency. Some fields, some field types are not supported. It doesn't support selective or on-demand required. So if a field is required on the object, then it's going to be required here. If it's not required there, it's not going to be required here. You can use the custom validation kind of workaround I'm going to show you. But, out of the box, you cannot add validation here. If you really truly need validation, then you're going to use the component from the other side, right? And fields functionality does not support a label change. Some of the fields are named weird, right? They are not easily digestible by the user. Sometimes the two words are kind of pushed together. That's the name of the field, right? So in those cases, you cannot relabel, and that's not good. And fields does not support user-defined or on-demand validations. So you cannot add another additional validation here. Length is already included, thrown in, but if you had something else, if you wanted to make sure that the value is greater than the other value or something, you're not going to be able to do this here out of the box. So I think I need to speed up a little bit. Let's speed up. So go to record and unofficial SF and App Exchange components. Now, many use cases require that the user is sent to a specific record or a page, a URL at the end of the ScreenFlow. This is not supported out of the box. So for this, I usually use the Flow Components App Exchange package by Engelhardt Consultant. Shout out to Rich here, who is in Jacksonville now. One of the longest fans of Flows as well, both low code and code developer. So as a solution for this, there are other solutions on unofficial SF and App Exchange. His solution is free; you can use it. Now, the use of unofficial SF and App Exchange solutions. Remember, this is not available for all orgs. Not every organization will allow the use of these. And also remember, if you use unofficial SF components, unmanaged packages, they are not going to be upgraded. So in time, you should calculate on the fact that you need to go back and check, possibly test a new version, upgrade it. With App Exchange components, you can get upgrades. But again, so this is something that you need to keep in mind and maintain over time if you are adding these things that are not out of the box. These will allow you to send the user to the recently created record. For example, if your ScreenFlow is creating a case, and if you want to send the user to the case after they click finish, it'll pull up that case for the user. Or it'll send it to the company webpage, to a form, to a URL. It'll send the user there. Now, data table and choice lookup components. Data table component is very capable now. It started with an unofficial SF component, and we use it, most of us. It will allow us to show multiple records and multiple field values in a table setup. Still, this is not editable. It's much more capable in the latest release. So I'm going to show you that. It's very useful. But if you need the user to be able to edit multiple field values, multiple records on one view, like kind of we do in list views, you're going to need to use the unofficial SF data table component still. It's very useful. Use it. And reactive components and Lightning Web components. Now, I don't really have a demo for you. I don't want to go into this right now. So this is still in beta, but it is a very exciting functionality that I'm looking forward to. We talked about this one until now. The only thing that was reactive sort of was conditional visibility on the page. Everything else was kind of dead, right? Everything else required for the user to click next. Now we started getting components that can react to each other. You can move a slider on the page, and that slider is going to update a number on the screen. For example, if you want the user to select a number 1 through 10, they can move the slider, and then you'll see a number in the number field or in the text field, whatever, change based on that. You can pick a pick list and then choose another choice as a result immediately. One pick list can move the other pick list. I don't think that one works yet, but that's going to be coming. And you can build a custom Lightning Web component that can react to other components and vice versa. Like the ultimate vision here is you are going to create a screen experience where you can have Lightning Web components, flow components, all these components react to each other if you choose to do so, right? So that's going to be exciting. Remember, we can actually include screen flows in Lightning Web components as well. Like, we can also include one in the other, or we can have them side by side, let's say on a community page reacting to each other. All kinds of possibilities are there. It's not simple to set up, and the functionality is not fully there, but it is very exciting. So before I go to my thank you and questions here, let me just dive into my work, right? So let's look at some of these examples in play. You still see my screen, I believe. I share the whole screen, right?
Yeah, we can see that.
All right, so let me just go into my org. So this is one of my preview orgs where I do a lot of work, and I was in it. I was just looking at some flows from 2020. It's been filling up. I created so many records in it at some point. The storage was almost full. I had to delete some stuff. It's gonna bust open at some point, but it's still holding up. So let's look at a flow example here where some of these things come into play. Because that's what I want to spend most of my time on. Most of my sessions that I do, I don't really have any slides. There are so many bits and pieces here. I wanted to show them to you on a slide set, but generally, I just want to show them in play here. So we have a screen flow here. And this screen flow, let me just debug it for you first. This screen flow starts with a search screen, right? This screen flow doesn't receive a record as an input. We can do that, as you know. We can start it on an account, for example. We can pass the account ID to the flow. We can pass the whole account record to the flow, whichever you prefer. But in this case, this is a flow that can be pretty much deployed anywhere, including the utility bar. It is replacing the standard Salesforce user interface with a completely different one. It says, to get started, pick an account. And for you to be able to find an account, you're going to pass it a string. You're going to say, okay, well, I want to find an account that has TE in the name. Now, what's the danger with that? If I go to do a get in an org, and I'm just looking for accounts that have TE in the name, there is a potential in big orgs that I could be getting more than 50,000 records. And if I get more than 50,000 records, my flow is going to break. I don't really want that, so I inserted a validation. So it says you need to enter at least 3 characters to proceed. Okay. So I need to give the search another letter and test. And then that returns the data table component. Now, the data table component includes many fields as columns. The column labels I get to define. I can change the field name. I don't have to use the field name. As you can see, I changed some of these here. I can paste an emoji in the column label. The recent release gave us, the most recent release gave us a search possibility in our list view, which is awesome. Now I can type something here, a partial string, and then that's going to narrow down the choices here. I don't have too many here, but it is going to be very useful if I have a big list. By the way, beyond the 50,000, the data table component also has a limitation of the records that it can show. That has been increased in the last release as well. It's quite useful, but if you go, you don't really have to go to 50,000 here. It's going to break before that. So let's say I chose the first one. Here you'll see, this is something I do often. Is it perfect? Probably not, but I can give the user the possibility to go back to search. If they change their minds, they looked at the accounts, they decided it's not one of them, they can go back to the previous screen. Now, in this case, the user is choosing test one, and then they click next, but test one doesn't have any contacts related to the account. The logic here I built, the idea is you pick the account, and then you go from the account to the contact. You go from the contact to the case. You edit the case, or if there is no case, create a case or something. So that's the idea, right? I'm playing with this idea. Obviously, if there is no contact, I can't really proceed. So I'm going to try again. As you can see, I relabeled the button here. This is the next button that's relabeled. And then if I click on that, I'm going to go back to the account search screen. So all these possibilities you find out as you start testing and playing with this, right? When you're designing an experience like this, it's kind of like crochet, like embroidery, it's knitting. So it takes time. You have to think about all the possibilities. Sometimes you cannot foresee some things, and it comes out during testing. And obviously, a second or third set of eyes is going to help you. That's quite useful. So let's try this again. Let's also test the other possibility here. If I don't want to pick any of these, go back to search. Does this work? It works. Good. All right. Now I'm going to pick the second one. Now these are, I should have populated these better. So there are no field values here. That's why you don't see anything in these particular records. We'll look at another one in a minute. So we have two contacts here, Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, right? So let's see if Lex Luthor has any, and I can also go back to search results again. Let's see if Lex Luthor has any cases. Now, it says there are no cases related to the contact. So now I gave the user two choices. I said, do you want to create a case, or do you want to just stop here? Exit, right? So I want to create a case, and as soon as I click that button, and that's the quick choice component set to run on click, I don't really have to click on next there. The user is asked, and this is coming from the fields dynamic forms for flow functionality, the subject, let's say Apex hours, case one, status new, case reason, installation description, test case one, and click next. And the case record has been created, success, right? Finish. It's also important to insert a success record, a success screen like this. This is very important. Do not leave this out, because when you deploy your flow, especially like on a Lightning record page, for example, the first thing I do with those, I usually start those with like a static screen. I don't want my flow, because That flow is going to be run every time somebody pulls up the Lightning page record on their screen. If you have 1,000, 2,000 call center agents across the world pulling up that record page, like 100 times a day, you are going to possibly see a performance impact. If you are doing 3 gets right off the get-go and then showing another screen, you possibly don't want to do that. You want to create a screen that'll say, okay, well, this is what this flow does. Click next to proceed. That's the first thing I do with those, right? Unless it's something very simple, right? You know, display some kind of, it could be dynamic information, but you don't really want to do a lot of operation there before the first screen. And then another thing I do is at the end, once they go through, click through the whole flow, at the end, I tell them success, this really went through and everything went fine, because as soon as they click finish on that page, that screen flow recycles. It goes back to the first screen again. It looks like nothing happened, it didn't go through, although it went through. Everything that was supposed to happen happened. So let's see how some of these things are done here inside our flow. So we have a screen flow. We have our account search screen, simple. The first thing I do is I remove the header from the standard header from the screen. I don't like it. I add a display text component here. That display text component has a title, sometimes has an explanation down below. I use blank, blank lines to create spacing. Sometimes I add a blank text, display text component to create spacing. You kind of want to have your screens about the same size. As the user is going through them, you don't want that screen size to change. Very quickly, before we go to a couple of questions, I think I'm running out of time. I'm doing a get on the search screen with contains. I'm checking whether the results are null. If I'm not getting a match, then I'm going to show a no results screen, and I'm going to have them try again. Sometimes, in this case, it looked like it was necessary, that it wasn't very necessary. Remember, sometimes you may have to reset some of the variables going back to the same screen. If you don't, if you have conditional visibility and whatnot, that could throw things off. And remember, if you're sending people back to the same screen, creating a validation, that's what I call custom validation. Sometimes you create a decision right after your screen, checking what the values the user provided are, and then you sometimes send them to the same screen. That's what I call the custom validation. I assign a variable. I assign an error message to a variable. That variable is in a display text component, is shown back to the user saying, okay, you know what, the submission that you have committed is not acceptable. But when you go back to that same screen, you want to make sure that all your field values are set to the submitted values. With dynamic forms of for flow or fields, that's not an issue. But with the other components, you want to make sure the default value is set to the latest submission so that the user doesn't have to enter the information over and over again. And then we have here does the user want to go back to the search check? We have the get contacts. This is pretty much repeat of the same functionality. And then we go to get cases. And then here, when you are using icons, the quick choice component uses icons, and those icon names are fed via a collection. You can create a text collection and assign values using add. You don't really have to loop. This is the icon for case. This is the icon for incident, and these are the labels. So you can do all that using assignments to a collection, and then your quick choice component could use that. And remember, your fault lines are quite important. At the end of your fault lines, I usually go to rollback. That's going to roll back all the half-baked changes that were done possibly before. and then you're gonna lead to a catch-all error screen here, right? And quickly show you, let me just show you before I finish this functionality here as well, where like if the user chooses this and this together, that's the conditional kind of relative validation that I had set up. They are going to get a message saying only one of these two needs to be selected, an account, or go back to search. You cannot select both. You know, you can do things like that as well. I think that concludes my presentation. If we have a couple of quick questions, let's do those. Right? I mean, how are we doing for time?
Yeah, we can take a quick question if anybody have it.
I think I
one
saw something in chat, I think, but what was it?
Yep, there is a one question. Any tip to format text template, particularly entering the text in new line?
Yeah, so there is something interesting here. When you are accumulating strings and you want to kind of update that into a long text, let's say on an object, the line breaks don't work. The way you do that is kind of like a hack. You create a text template, you put just the brackets, the less than bracket, it's right here. Let me just type it, it's easier. You put the line break HTML code in it. What I do is I create a text template. I call the text template BR. I just insert this in it. That's it. And then I add that when I'm compiling a string, I add that into my string. Like, for example, I add to my string first name, space, last name, and then this text template with BR in it. That will give it a line break. And then possibly the street name, street address, and then line break, and then city line break, and that kind of stuff. That's kind of like a hack you need to use if you want to use line breaks in text and display text. Any other questions?